Just another Team Tinker workday for the Air Force Sustainment Center and the Air Force Materiel Command. Tinker, Gott, Vance, Eaker, and Lancer security gates greet civilian and military members alike as they begin another day of work defending the interests of the United States of America.
On the ground, more than 18,000 civilian employees, 6,000 active duty guard and reserve personnel, and 2,300 contractors all make up the Tinker workforce, which comes from more than 40 of Oklahoma's 77 counties. Tinker Air Force Base is the largest single-site employer in the state of Oklahoma, with an economic impact of nearly $5 billion a year.
In the air, Navy Wing 1, AWACS, KC-135 tankers, B-52 and B-1 bombers launch and return from training missions. As you move about the base, it is easy to see the pride civilian patriots have in supporting the war fighters who take the oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. The strategic role multiple aircraft play in defense of our nation today is the result of more than 7 decades of civilian and military leadership. It has not always been like this. It all began in 1941 with the establishment of Oklahoma City Midwest Air Depot, and in 1942 with Douglas Manufacturing Plant.
History records the start of World War II as 1 September 1939. Yet the United States for 2 years maintained neutrality, except for supplying the Allies with war supplies and materials. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the United States could no longer sit on the sidelines and do nothing while the world was at war. Faced with defeating tyranny, the United States declared war.
War Department leaders understood the need for a maintenance depot and manufacturing facility in the geographic center of the country. The efforts of 2 prominent Oklahoma City leaders changed the landscape of southeast Oklahoma County. One led to the creation of Tinker Air Force Base, and the other to a new model city.
Well, in terms of the history of central Oklahoma, there are really 2 events that shaped our history. One, the land run of 1889. The second was getting Tinker Air Force Base. And the world knew about that in April of 1940, but the story really begins earlier. Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States, knew we were going to be involved. He had the Lend-Lease program. He was trying to help the Allies as much as he could, but he still did not have Congress declaring war. So what could he do? He had an advisory commission that was headed by William Knutson, who had started Chevrolet Motor Division. And William Knutson, trying to be this conduit from the military to the private sector, called on his friend in Oklahoma City, Fred Jones, who had a large auto dealership, and drew Fred into Washington, D.C., $1 a year man is what they called him, and he was helping the military decide where to build manufacturing plants and air depots. And when they said they needed air depots in the Midwest, he says Oklahoma City is the right spot for that. He did the lobbying. He had the support of the community that agreed to build roads and pipelines and deliver water, all the things needed with a manufacturing plant. And finally, in April of 1940, history changes in central Oklahoma because they announced that Midwest Air Depot would be built here, later renamed Tinker Air Force Base.
8 months later, the Army Air Corps awards the Douglas Manufacturing Plant to Oklahoma City for the purpose of building aircraft to support the war. Ever the entrepreneur, it was the vision and dream of W.P. Bill Atkinson to complement the War Department's decision by building a community that would support the workers of the depot and manufacturing plant.
The reason Midwest City is here was to support the men and women who were the freedom fighters at the base. And it was very important that the Pentagon officials made sure that this base and the community that supported the base had all of the extras that individuals were going to need or families were going to need. And so it was very important that this was a military-centered community. The wonderful part about this supportive community was that we had the shopping center, We had various churches, the schools, parks, all of the things that families would need to live their daily lives.
In March of 1943, Douglas Manufacturing begins production of C-47 Skytrains.
Well, Tinker Air Force Base would be critical to the Allied effort to win World War II. During the war, more than half of the 10,000 C-47 Skytrains were built right here at Tinker Air Force Base. At one point, 13 were coming off the assembly line every day. Rosie the Riveter was there helping with this massive war effort where the community was engaged every day. And at the end of the war, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Commander-in-Chief of all Allied forces, would credit the C-47 as being one of the main reasons that the Allies won that war.
Production of the 1,000th C-47 was celebrated on March 18, 1944. 2 weeks earlier, Skytrain Unit number 42-92838 rolled off the assembly line in Oklahoma City, ready to take its place of assignment in the war.
Except for December 7th, 1941, a day that President Roosevelt said will live in infamy, D-Day, 6 June 1944, is perhaps the most recognizable and honored day of World War II on both sides of the Atlantic.
That mission to liberate Western Europe from Nazi control remains the most massive operation of land, sea, and air assets ever assembled. An armada of 6,939 ships, 2,395 aircraft that included 832 C-47s, and more than 156,000 soldiers and paratroopers made the assault on 5 Normandy beaches that covered 50 miles of shoreline.
Skytrain tail number 2838 carried 17 82nd Airborne troops on D-Day. Number 5 in that jump order was Vincencio Fiore from New York City. He joined at the age of 17 and intended to be an aerial gunner, but later transferred to training in North Carolina to become a paratrooper, where he was assigned to the 1st Battalion Headquarters Company of the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. Private Fiore survived the D-Day jump, but was killed in action 4 days later on June 10, 1944. For his gallantry and his valor, he was awarded a Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and a French unit citation. Sadly, none of the other paratroopers that were in that plane that day survived beyond July the 7th.
Halfway across the country in Weatherford, Texas, young Royce W. Barnes was exempt from military service. Feeling bad that his friends were at war while he remained stateside, he enlisted. Second Lieutenant Barnes drew the D-Day assignment to fly Skytrain number 2838 in chalk position number 9 in a formation of 45 C-47s. At the close of that exceptionally long day, he wrote home.
My father wrote my mother just about every other day from when he could, of course. And he wrote one on the day of D-Day that I was unaware that he was flying on D-Day. But this letter is dated June the 7th, and on the as the postmark is anyway, but on the inside, he starts it with saying somewhere in England, Tuesday, June the 6th, in the PM. My dearest ones, well, darling, again as usual, I suppose you haven't received a letter from me in a few days. But as you can see by radio reports and news items, we've been pretty busy over here. This is the day everyone has been waiting for. We were in the spearhead of the assault, and I'm plenty tired today. No sleep in 24 hours. So I think I'll hit the bed pretty soon now. Just a line to let you know I'm okay and thinking of you and love you very much. We'll write more later. Love, Royce. And so he wrote that at 6 p.m. on June 6, 1944.
Lieutenant Barnes flew 17 combat missions. On September 18th, as a part of the Market Garden campaign, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross.
For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight on 18 September 1944 as pilot of a troop carrier aircraft on a glider mission over enemy lines in Holland. Approximately 10 miles from the objective and at an altitude of about 700 feet, heavy concentrations of enemy ground fire were encountered which severely wounded the aerial engineer, knocked out the right engine of the aircraft, and punctured the left tire. Despite the danger of the plane stalling or falling into a spin or collision with other planes in the formation, Lieutenant Barnes continued on course through enemy flak of mounting intensity to accurately release his glider over the appointed landing zone. Lieutenant Barnes elected to return across the English Channel to the United Kingdom, where immediate medical attention could be procured for his seriously injured crew member. Lieutenant Barnes made a successful single-engine landing on one tire. The admirable manner in which Lieutenant Barnes executed this important mission and the courage and superb airmanship displayed is exemplary of the finest traditions of the United States Army Air Forces. Entered military service from Texas.
1 C-47 Skytrain plane. 2 patriotic Americans from vastly different backgrounds. 2 missions. 2 different outcomes. One saw the war to its completion. The other gave the ultimate sacrifice. Both had the innocence of their youth stolen by war. After World War II, the federal government disposed of C-47s as war surplus equipment.
Well, that plane was purchased by Phillips Petroleum Company. Phillips stripped off the military insignia, put civilian numbers on it, and sold it to another emerging oil company called Kerr-McGee, founded by Dean McGee and Robert S. Kerr in 1939. It was just expanding into offshore drilling, into coal, uranium, a variety of industries, and they needed an aircraft for their executives. For the next 30 years, Kerr-McGee would use that plane to drive the engines of free enterprise in Oklahoma. Not only were they doing business to reward their stockholders and to employ thousands of Oklahomans, but they were using it to support the community. At one point, 8 executives from different companies in Oklahoma City got on that airplane, flew to Washington, D.C. to meet with, at that time, Senator Robert S. Kerr to talk about an early grant that we now call urban renewal. Oklahoma City and central Oklahoma was very aggressive in applying these federal grants to restart the economy, to keep things moving. And that airplane had a very important role in taking those executives to the very first meeting to talk about bringing urban renewal to Oklahoma.
Home base of operations for this plane was Will Rogers World Airport. However, it made numerous flights past the downtown air park and Oklahoma City skyline. How could anyone associated with Kerr-McGee know that the downtown air park runway would one day become a boulevard? Or that Oklahoma City residents would view the downtown skyline of Big Friendly not from windows of a plane, but from the top of a Ferris wheel? Kerr-McGee corporate pilot Harry Anderson shared memories of those missions with his son Mike.
Dad, tell us a little bit about your memory of the C-47 in particular and some of the missions or flights that you might have gone on.
Well, flying the C-47 or the DC-3 or the Doug with Kerr-McGee, we flew normally 8-hour survey missions. We were surveying for uranium, and we were flying 500 feet above the ground. and 1/4 mile separation. So we had a very sophisticated navigation system on our DC-3, and we'd fly 8 hours at a time, and we'd go out on a 2-week tour. So each 2 weeks racked up quite a lot of hours. Flying the C-47 down in southern Arizona in the summertime, when the temperature was probably 120 degrees in the shade. We were flying in the southern part of Arizona in the mountains, and we wound up in a box canyon, and it scared the thunder out of me. So I had to give the airplane full power, pull up on the nose, kick the rudder to the left, and turn real sharp so we can get back out of the mountains. And I remember that the rest of my life.
In September 1976, Kerr McGee retired the plane and donated it to the Oklahoma State Fair. The FAA declared the plane destroyed. From 1976 to 2006, this Skytrain was elevated on static display at the state fairgrounds. Initially, it reflected the commercial look of Kerr McGee and later was displayed with the B-52.
Early in the 2000s, when the State Fair decided that they were going to remove the air park from the State Fair grounds, we had some initial conversations about would the Oklahoma Historical Society and the Evolving History Center be in a position and be interested in taking ownership of the C-47 that was currently at the State Fair Park. We were interested, but we did not have the resources or the location fully developed to be able to accept the plane.
Despite History Center interest, the State Fair Board donated the C-47 to Metrotech Aviation at Will Rogers Airport for display at the entry of their campus. The plane remained unsupervised and unanchored in their parking lot for 10 years. After a violent spring storm damaged the plane in 2017, school leaders decided it was time to find another home for the plane.
And about 2017 is when a group of interested citizens, led by Representative Gary Bands, came to the Historical Society and asked if there was a way for us to become involved, and were we interested in trying to preserve this historic aircraft. We, of course, were. This is an exceptional plane that represents many, many interesting facets of Oklahoma history, all tied up in this one aircraft. So working with Representative Bands and with other members of the community, we were able to coordinate activities to develop funding for the preservation of the aircraft, and that was a key, as well as working with the city of Midwest City and a location for the aircraft to be placed. As the program to save and then renovate the aircraft developed, we were able to partner with several outstanding organizations, one of the principal being Compass Aviation. They assumed a leadership role in disassembling the aircraft and then in preparing it to be renovated with an appropriate paint scheme and so forth and so on. They partnered with Allied Steel, who played a central role in transporting the aircraft from Metrotech to the grounds of Compass Aviation and then ultimately to Joe B. Barnes Park.
I remember setting up a meeting with Dan. We all went over and kind of discussed the project, maybe what they were looking for. So clearly they were looking to redo the exterior for a static display and wanted to know if we'd be interested in transporting it, doing the painting, and then taking it back. Not at all what we do at this company, but we did like the project. We were very interested in doing it. So ultimately we agreed and came up with some pricing and some terms to get it done. And the rest is history, I guess. You've got the history, you've got the military history, but you've also got Oklahoma's contribution to the war effort. And I thought that story was very important to tell. And me being an aviation company owner in Oklahoma, I wasn't even aware about that story. So I think that kind of locked it up for us once we started understanding the history and we were talking about that exact aircraft, that serial number rolling off the line, going to Europe, doing its missions. Yeah, I don't think we would have not done the project after that. There was definitely something that we felt like we could be proud of.
Now it is displayed 2 miles north of the facility where it rolled off the assembly line in 1944, completing a lifetime of active duty service on December 3rd, 2017. 2 organizations with Oklahoma ties commemorate World War II veterans. From 2010 to 2016, Oklahoma Honor Flights, based in Midwest City, conducted 24 flights honoring 2,055 veterans with a day visit to Washington, D.C. to view their memorials. Flight number 8 took place on the anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 2012. The other organization is Liberty Jump Team.
Well, I had 5 uncles that served in World War II, and so I had a deep history in my family of World War II veterans. And in 2006, we formed the Liberty Jump Team to do static line parachute jumps out of vintage C-47 aircraft. And we want to honor the airborne of the World War II and the current airborne too. The C-47 that's on display in Midwest City, its World War II mission was to drop paratroopers with the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment into Ampreville, France on D-Day. And every year, the Liberty Jump Team, one of our jumps in Normandy is that same Ampreville, France 507th drop zone. And we do that to honor the 507th Parachute and also what the C-47 did in World War II in Normandy.
The reenactment of the day Private Vincenzo Fior and his 82nd Airborne Unit made their assault on enemy positions exposes the stark reality that combat soldiers are asked to do and see things no human being should do or see. Their heroic deeds must never be forgotten.
Preserving history is important because, for 2 reasons. One is to preserve the legacy of those that have gone before in the defense of freedom for this great country, and for the world for that matter. And secondly, it is important for future generations to recognize the significant contribution of those before and honor them for their service and their sacrifice.
When I served in the legislature in about year 2006, I was contacted by some people in New York. Their question to me, their challenge to me was, would you be willing to be boots on the ground in Oklahoma City to validate what we think to be true about an aircraft that was at that time displayed at the Oklahoma State Fairgrounds. And I more than willingly obliged their challenge. Very quickly, we were able to document with information they had provided me about the plane that in fact it was the plane that their uncle had jumped out of on D-Day. That man was Vincenzo O. Fior. Records and information about records that they had provided me with tail numbers and serial numbers and manufacturing numbers coincided with the production numbers from the Douglas manufacturing plant in Oklahoma City. In a very short period of time, we were able to secure documents from the FAA that tracked that plane once it left federal service after the war as war surplus material, all the way down to its possession at the fairgrounds. In that process, it became obvious there were a lot of other people that had an interest in this plane. We were able to find the daughter of the man who flew the plane on D-Day. We were able to find a man who flew the plane for Kerr McGee. We were able to document that the plane was actually manufactured and came off the assembly line, the Douglas manufacturing plant in Oklahoma City on March the 5th, 1944. And so all of these other component parts of the plane then just elevated the importance of capturing that story to save it and to use it to challenge future generations, not only to remember what that plane did as a component part of World War II, but the significance of its service after the war in a commercial arena, and the 30 years then that it stood as on display at the fairgrounds, reminding people, along with the B-52 and other aircraft, about the significance of Oklahoma supporting not only aviation, but our military and the significance of Tinker Air Force Base.
You know, 4 years ago, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, I read a letter from a young woman writing to her late father, who had fought on Omaha Beach. Her name was Lisa Zanata Henn, and she said, "We will always remember. We will never forget what the boys of Normandy did." Well, let's help her keep her word. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare.
When General Eisenhower gave the order to begin the D-Day campaign, he addressed his commanders with the words, "Okay, let's go." For future generations to live in freedom, liberty must be defended today. That is our challenge. You know the mission. Okay, let's go.